Hello friend, welcome to Stories by Tocci. We bring you interesting folk tales. Please don't forget to hit the like button, please share, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you for doing so. Now let's get into the story. The wind that morning carried no promises. It dragged dust along the roadside, lifting the hems of wrappers and tugging gently at plastic bags like a mischief too idle to cause real harm. Melora adjusted the satchel across her chest as she guided her daughter Zoe around a muddy patch by the curb. Their footsteps echoed faintly on the tarmac, the only rhythm left in a morning stripped of music. Melora's slippers, worn thin at the heel, flapped faintly as she walked. Zoe, barely 8, wore a school uniform that had faded into something between ash and indigo, her little shoes stiff with old polish. They didn't talk much on their walk to the bus junction. Melora saved her breath for thoughts, and Zoe had long mastered the quiet obedience of a child too familiar with lack. Across the road, a sleek black SUV slowed to a crawl. The tinted glass window on the passenger side slid down partway, and a man's voice, smooth but laced with sarcasm, bled into the morning air. Some people were born to trek, he chuckled to his live audience online. His phone, perched neatly on the dashboard, captured the unfolding scene. Melora didn't look. She'd learned the hard way that silence sometimes roars louder than dignity can afford. But Zoe did glance up, and that glance caught the lens just long enough to become a still frame in the viral clip that would erupt before noon. A low laugh followed from the SUV, and the man revved his engine slightly, adding, "One day, your daughter go come serve me food for my mansion. No worry, ego better." The car glided past. Zoe gripped her mother's hand a little tighter. Melora said nothing. Her fingers merely squeezed back. No insult clung to her skin that hadn't been thrown before. Still, this one had a camera. Derek didn't consider himself cruel, just honest. Sharp with words, magnetic with presence, and blessed with what he called strategic bad boy charm. He had carved out an identity as a brash but entertaining social media figure. He was the kind who believed life was content and pain was optional, especially if it didn't belong to him. He spent that morning checking reactions on his stream, sipping a fizzy canned drink in a barber's chair, as the stylist trimmed the hard part into his fresh cut. The clip of the roadside cruise had already been clipped and reposted with captions like "mocking poverty in 4K," and "you won't believe what this influencer said." Some were laughing, others were angry. But for Derek, anger was just more reach. He believed attention was a currency, and he'd earned his stack. Even when an anonymous comment read, "You just mocked the wrong woman. Watch how tables turn," he smirked, screen grabbed it, and reposted with a caption, "Tables turn, chairs slide, I still dine." His laughter echoed through the barber shop, where younger boys hailed him like a prince of their generation. He had plans. A PR job was opening at Wavebridge Media, the very company he'd once mocked for being too soft. He wanted that job now. It would help him pivot from viral clown to corporate charm. He submitted his CV through a friend of a friend already on the panel. The referral had legs, he believed, and his resume, though flamboyant, was sprinkled with media buzzwords and doctored figures. What Derek didn't know, what would haunt him by dawn, was that someone else had walked into that same company for a different reason, quietly, sincerely, and with nothing but a hand-me-down blouse and an iron will. Inside her sparsely furnished apartment tucked behind a row of unfinished buildings in Shantung District, Melora sat on the edge of her bed, staring at Zoe's school shoes. The soles were thinning, the lace on the left shoe had broken and been replaced with twine. She exhaled slowly, reached for a sewing needle, and began to reinforce the stitching with calm hands. On the wooden stool beside her lay a worn folder, the one that held her credentials, reference letter, and a printout of the training schedule at Wavebridge Media. Melora had just completed a 6-month retraining program designed for women re-entering the workforce after a long hiatus. Her husband had died from a stroke 3 years ago, just a week before Zoe's 5th birthday. Since then, survival had been a delicate choreography of trading dignity for rent, job rejections, unpaid favors, and the kind of tiredness that didn't always go away with sleep. But this new opportunity was different. Tomorrow, she was scheduled to help conduct assessment interviews as part of the recruitment final phase, part of her training and a test of readiness. She didn't know who would walk in. She didn't know the name Derek Shaw. She only knew she had one chance left to prove she hadn't lost her sharpness, her grace under pressure, or the voice she once used in boardrooms before life shrunk her to roadside shadows. She looked at Zoe as she ate bread with margarine from an old plastic plate and whispered in her heart, not to God, but to her late husband, "I'm still trying, Nelson. I'm still here." By nightfall, the internet was divided. Influencers posted reactions to the mocking video. Some sided with Derek, arguing humor was harmless, while others condemned the display as yet another proof of insensitivity among the privileged and performative. One user posted a slowed-down screenshot of Zoe's expression, her small eyes wide, lips pressed tightly, clinging to her mother, and captioned it, "She didn't speak, but the world heard her." It became the thumbnail of 1,000 reposts. Derek's inbox was buzzing with mixed messages, but the platform's algorithm kept boosting the clip. One brand that had signed a deal with him 2 weeks ago pulled out, citing reputation concerns. Still, he laughed. "They always crawl back," he told his friends, sipping whiskey in a rooftop lounge that night. "You'll see. Watch me rebrand this whole drama." He tapped his phone and pulled up the address for Wavebridge Media's head office. His interview was at 10:30 a.m. sharp. Across town, Melora rinsed out Zoe's socks and hung them on a string beside the window. She turned off the bulb and sat quietly in the dark, her back against the wall, feeling both the weight of her tomorrow and the ghost of everything she'd endured to get there. The city outside buzzed. Her street didn't. Her thoughts drifted, not to revenge or recognition, but to the simple dream of becoming whole again. She didn't know the face she'd see across that interview table, but she was ready for whatever it brought. The morning came quietly, without the drama of sunbursts or crowing roosters. The sky was pale gray, undecided between rain and heat. Melora was already dressed before Zoe stirred in bed. She wore her navy blouse, the one she reserved for serious days, ironed the night before with the edge of a pot heated over the kerosene stove. Her skirt had a small rip at the hem that she'd stitched carefully, and her handbag, though aging at the seams, was packed with her pen, ID badge, extra gum for fresh breath, and a bottle of water that had been filled the night before to avoid the morning queue at the communal tap. She moved through the tiny room like a shadow, purposeful and soft, stopping only to brush Zoe's hair with an old toothbrush and tie it into 2 neat puffs. "I'll drop you at school, then go for my duty," she said, kissing the child's forehead. Zoe nodded, still half asleep, but used to these moments. As they stepped into the dim corridor, other tenants were already emerging, one with a bucket, another with a bag of akara for resale. A woman at the far end greeted her softly, and Melora smiled back, her steps brisk but unhurried. They reached the main road just in time to board a rickety bus that groaned like it was protesting another day of work. As it bounced through potholes and dust, Melora kept her gaze fixed on the blurry view outside. She wasn't just going to wave bridge as a trainee today. She was going to take her place at the other end of a long table, a place she once occupied years ago before life interrupted her ambition. She hadn't told anyone what the role meant to her. She didn't want to jinx it. Sometimes, speaking dreams out loud felt like handing them over to fate for judgment. In another corner of the city, Derek was having a different kind of morning. He woke up late, not because he overslept, but because he believed the illusion that he had control over the day. His room reeked faintly of last night's cologne and something else, pride dressed as comfort. He slid out of bed and stood in front of his wardrobe, contemplating which suit looked both corporate and edgy.
He settled on a dark green blazer over a beige turtleneck and gold wristwatch that gleamed in the half-light. His beard was freshly lined, his shoes shined to an arrogant gleam, and he practiced his charm in the mirror before leaving. "Make them know you're different," he whispered to his reflection, the corners of his mouth tugging upward in a rehearsed smile. He didn't print out his credentials. They were in a sleek digital portfolio on his tablet. As he stepped into his rideshare, he plugged in his earbuds and played a motivational podcast, nodding as the speaker declared, "Confidence opens doors that competence only knocks on." The irony didn't strike him. He arrived at the Wavebridge Media headquarters, a mid-rise building with blue glass panels and a subtle logo on a curved marble wall. The lobby was calm, professional, like a place where secrets wore suits. A receptionist handed him a visitor's tag and directed him to a waiting area beside a potted palm. He walked in with a swagger, unaware that the same building was quietly holding a mirror to his actions. The clip of him mocking Melora had not only reached the HR department, it had sparked a silent conversation about culture, respect, and whether charisma could redeem cruelty. The person at the center of the storm sat just 2 floors above, flipping through resumes and sipping lukewarm tea, unaware that the final name on the list would resurrect something she buried just yesterday. Back upstairs, the office floor was humming with quiet motion. Interns passed by with files, someone printed out evaluation sheets, and the panel room was being prepped with bottled water, notepads, and nameplates. Melora sat beside the team lead, a tall, graceful woman named Clara, who had mentored her throughout her training. Clara had a soft voice but sharp instincts, and she often said, "In this job, people talk with their mouths, but they reveal with their eyes." Melora took that seriously. She reviewed her segment of the assessment again, cultural sensitivity and ethical problem solving. Her task was to pose challenging questions to applicants and observe not just what they said, but how they handled discomfort. She didn't know Derek was among the final candidates. His name had been added last minute by one of the company directors who admired his public engagement skills. The resumes were shuffled by ID codes, and when Melora saw D. Shaw, she didn't connect the dots. She only noted that his application claimed he was passionate about uplifting marginalized voices and creating inclusive digital narratives. It sounded like performance. Still, she didn't flinch. She'd learned that sometimes masks fall on their own when held under the right light. She stood to adjust the chair placements, smoothed out the edges of the interview table, and took her place with the calm dignity of a woman who knew that her presence, once ignored, now held weight. Outside the glass door, Derek was adjusting his tie and stretching his neck. His watch read 10:28 a.m. He didn't know the storm he thought he controlled was already sitting at the center of the room. The assistant opened the door at exactly 10:30. Derek walked in, exuding charm. He flashed a quick smile at the 3 panelists and introduced himself with practiced ease. "Good morning. Derek Shaw. It's a pleasure." His eyes scanned the room, then landed on the woman seated farthest to the left. Her face was unreadable. For a split second, he hesitated, the smile faltering by a millimeter, but quickly recovered. Melora nodded slowly. "Good morning, Mr. Shaw," she said, voice steady. "Please have a seat." The air shifted, not with tension, but with a kind of quiet reckoning. Derek sat down, trying to keep his composure. A bottled water stood unopened in front of him. The session began with routine questions from the other panelists, and he handled them well, quick wit, polished answers, jokes delivered with precision. But when it came to the cultural ethics segment, Melora leaned slightly forward, her tone neutral but deliberate. "Tell us about a time when your words had unintended consequences, and how you handled the aftermath." Silence fell. Derek's smile dimmed. He coughed slightly and adjusted his sleeve. Well, I try to be intentional with my messaging. But if ever he began. Melora interrupted gently. "I'm not asking about theory, Mr. Shaw. I'm asking for an example. A real one." Her eyes didn't waver. He knew. She knew. but no one else in the room did.
And that invisible understanding stitched a new narrative into the air, one not of revenge, but of accountability coming dressed in unexpected clothes. Derek swallowed, suddenly aware that he was no longer performing for clicks. He was auditioning for mercy. The stillness inside the room tightened as Derek searched for the right words. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again, the usual stream of rehearsed charm frozen under the weight of what he suspected was silent recognition. Melora had asked her question in a way that offered no exit route, no chance to dodge behind fluffy language or cloak himself in broad principles. Her gaze, calm and patient, held him like a lens, and for the first time since stepping into the room, Derek felt naked. Not physically, but morally, stripped of filters, angles, and algorithms. He cleared his throat again, glanced at the bottle of water, and reached for it only to realize his fingers trembled slightly. "There was an incident," he began, the words emerging like a confession half-formed. "Recently, I made a comment online. It was meant to be playful, but it was misread." One of the other panelists, an older gentleman with silver hair, looked up with interest. "Misread by who?" he asked gently. Derek blinked. "By the public. It went viral." Melora tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. He continued, voice losing its previous shine. "I saw a woman and her daughter on the street. I made a joke while streaming. I didn't think it would." He paused, catching himself before saying blow up, as if his mistake was merely about reach. "I didn't think it would hurt anyone," he finished instead, choosing the softer wound. No one spoke. A beat passed. Then Melora asked, "Did you apologize?" The question was delivered without sharpness, but it sliced through him all the same. "Not yet," he whispered. The truth sounded so small in the room. The silence that followed was not awkward. It was necessary. The kind of silence that doesn't wait to be filled, but demands to be felt. Derek sat upright, unsure whether to continue or retreat. He wasn't used to being disarmed this way. Online, his words danced with confidence. Offline, under Melora's gaze, they stuttered and second-guessed themselves. Clara, the team lead, shifted in her chair. She hadn't yet made the connection, but she could feel something nuanced in the room, a private thread pulling taut. She moved the interview along, asking Derek about strategy and branding, giving him space to recover. He answered, regaining some composure, but a different tone had settled in. Less boastful, less theatrical. Melora remained quiet for most of the remaining session, scribbling occasional notes that had little to do with resumes and everything to do with character. When the session ended, Derek stood and thanked them all, his smile smaller, eyes flicking once more to her face. Melora returned a nod, her hands folded loosely in her lap. As he exited the room, he exhaled sharply, pressing the elevator button with the kind of urgency reserved for people escaping a place where their reflection wasn't flattering. Downstairs, the receptionist smiled politely and handed him his ID card. He left the building without a word, heart pounding, not because he feared rejection, but because he just realized he had been given a chance to see himself from the outside, and what he saw unsettled him. Inside the meeting room, the discussion turned to evaluation. The panelists went around offering brief thoughts, some praising Derek's creativity, others questioning his judgment. Clara turned to Melora last. "Your take?" she asked simply. Melora set down her pen, her fingers calmly smoothing the paper before her as though gathering courage from order. "He's intelligent," she said carefully, "but there's a disconnect between who he is and who he thinks he needs to be." One of the panelists raised an eyebrow. "Could you expand?" She hesitated, then spoke with quiet certainty. "There's something fragile behind the performance. I think he's more aware than he lets on." She didn't reveal the full truth.
She didn't mention the roadside, or the sting of silence, or how her daughter's small hand had clenched in fear when laughter from behind tinted glass mocked their poverty. She didn't tell them she had gone home that day and cried into her pillow, not because of shame, but because she felt invisible again, like someone who had no voice, even when standing still. No, she kept all that within. Not to protect him, but to protect herself from being defined by that moment. If Derek was to be judged, it wouldn't be by her pain. It would be by his choices. He needs to be tested beyond branding, she added. If this company is serious about integrity, let's see how he responds when he thinks no one is watching. Clara looked at her for a long time, then nodded. We'll note it. Later that evening, the sky opened and released a light drizzle across Glenshire. The city dimmed beneath clouds, and lights flickered on across high-rise windows and narrow alleyways alike. Melora took the bus home alone. Zoe had stayed at a neighbor's house after school. As she rode past familiar corners, the roadside where the incident happened, the bus stop where she once waited for jobs that never came, she allowed herself a long exhale. Her phone buzzed once, a message from an unknown number. I don't know if you'll read this. I think you interviewed me today. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I didn't know. I see now. And I'm sorry. No name. No emojis. Just a plain apology that didn't ask for forgiveness, but didn't run from it either. Melora stared at the screen, thumb hovering above the keypad, unsure what to say. The bus jolted as it turned a sharp corner, snapping her attention back to the window. She closed the message without replying. Some answers are earned through action, not words. Across the city, Derek sat on the edge of his couch, staring at a paused video on his TV, the same viral clip of him laughing from the SUV. But now, the audio wasn't funny. His own voice made him cringe. He turned the screen off, then sat in the dark, wondering how long a man had to sit in silence before he could say he'd changed. For the first time in a long time, he didn't reach for his phone to perform his thoughts. He just let them stay where they were, unseen, unfiltered, and heavy. The next morning, the city rose under a hesitant sky, half clouded and unsure of its mood. Melora woke to the sound of distant car horns and the gentle snore of Zoe curled beside her. She didn't move for several minutes. Instead, she stared at the ceiling, fingers tracing invisible lines on the mattress, her mind replaying the previous day's encounter not with anger, but with a quiet ache she couldn't name. There was a strange weight to recognizing someone who had humiliated you and being in a position not to retaliate, but to measure. It wasn't vengeance, it was a test of restraint. She remembered Derek's face, the moment his confidence cracked, the stammer in his voice when he realized who she was. She had watched it all, like someone watching a play they once starred in, but now viewed from backstage. Eventually she stood up, washed her face with cold water from a blue bucket, and tied her hair with the same scarf she'd worn during her training. The office didn't require her that morning. Clara had scheduled a feedback session for later in the afternoon, but Melora decided to walk Zoe to school anyway. On the way, they passed the exact spot where the SUV incident had occurred. Zoe glanced up at her and asked, "Mummy, why did that man laugh at us?" Melora paused for a beat, then replied softly, "Because some people laugh before they understand." Zoe didn't press further. She just nodded like a child who accepted explanations, not because they made full sense, but because she trusted the voice that gave them. Derek, meanwhile, found himself unable to sleep past 5, not because of anxiety in the traditional sense, but because his body felt out of place, like it didn't belong to the same ego it once carried. He had always taken pride in being composed, calculated, someone who could navigate chaos and still come out on top. But now, with his Instagram account still restricted and the buzz around his name shifting from admiration to critique, he wasn't so sure what on top even meant anymore. He sat at his kitchen counter, sipping from a mug of black tea he didn't really want, staring at a list of pending callbacks from 2 other agencies that had gone cold since the video surfaced. He'd never been officially canceled, but the air had changed. Fewer likes, more silence. The kinds of DMs that used to light up with "Big Bro inspire me" had turned into awkward silence or thinly veiled sarcasm. He had deleted the mocking clip from his device, but it lived online, stitched and shared and reframed as a symbol of public cruelty. Every time he saw the image of that little girl's eyes, wide, stunned, and holding back tears, he felt something twist in him, not guilt exactly, but something deeper, a sense that he had touched a nerve bigger than himself. He replayed Melora's question in his head over and over. "Did you apologize?" Her voice had not accused, but it had exposed. And so he sent the message last night.
Not for applause, not for closure, just because it felt wrong to carry it in silence.
At Wavebridge Media, the hiring committee gathered again that afternoon for the final round of deliberations. The office smelled faintly of citrus from the cleaning team's morning rounds, and soft jazz hummed through the speakers in the hallway. Clara walked in with a folder tucked beneath her arm and her reading glasses perched on her nose.
The other panelists were already seated, sipping coffee and reviewing their notes. Melora came in last, her face composed, her blouse neatly tucked, her lips bare of any polish. Clara began the meeting with a recap of the shortlisted candidates, and Derek's name was third on the list. The conversation opened gently, but deepened as differing opinions emerged.
One panelist, Mr. Dalton, felt Derek showed raw talent and should be given a chance with mentorship. Another woman, Nia, was hesitant. "His public behavior conflicts with our values," she said plainly. "Even if he regrets it now, it was a serious lapse." Clara turned to Melora without prompting. "Any final input?" she asked. Melora sat up, not to draw attention, but to center her words. "What I saw wasn't just a man trying to impress," she began. "It was someone who didn't know the difference between visibility and value. But I also saw someone who froze when asked to own up. Not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't know how. That's where he's human." The room was quiet.
Clara nodded slowly. "We'll send feedback to all candidates. No decisions today." As they stood to leave, Clara pulled Melora aside and asked quietly, "He was the one, wasn't he?" Melora didn't deny it. She just nodded once. "But I'd rather let his future speak louder than my past." Later that evening, the sun slid beneath the rooftops of Glenshire in a slow, orange retreat. Melora sat on a wooden stool just outside her room, a plate of rice balanced on her lap, and Zoe humming softly as she colored in an old notebook beside her. There was a calm in the compound. Someone was ironing inside, another boiling water on a coal pot. She heard laughter from the other end of the yard, the kind of laughter that belonged to people who still believed tomorrow might be kinder. Her phone buzzed once. A new message. It was from Derek. "If you're willing, I'd like to buy you coffee. Not for closure, just to learn. You don't owe me anything, but I owe that child and her mother something I never gave." Melora stared at it for a long time, thumb resting near the reply icon. She didn't respond. Not out of pride, but because not all invitations need immediate answers. Some needed to sit and stretch. Across town, Derek sat at a park bench with a small notepad in hand, scribbling ideas that didn't involve clout. He had reached out to a youth center earlier that day, offering to volunteer on a digital literacy program. He didn't mention his influencer background. He just said he wanted to help. As dusk wrapped the city in its quiet shawl, both lives settled into reflection. Different spaces, different reasons, but tethered by the same memory of a roadside moment that neither of them would ever forget. The streets of Glenshire bustled beneath a late morning sun that bounced off rooftops and windshields, pouring gold over concrete and chaos. Inside Wavebridge Media's head office, the mood was tenser than usual.
The video of Derek mocking the woman and child had resurfaced in full length, not from his live stream, but from a street vendor's unedited recording that showed angles and words never seen in the original viral cut. In the full clip, Derek had said more than just a comment about being born to trek. He had leaned out of his car window and pointed at Zoe, laughing with a friend on speakerphone, saying, "See this one? She go soon carry tray for junction. Nah, so they're type day end." That part hadn't gone viral before, but now it had. A popular Twitter account had reposted it with the caption, "This is the man some of you said deserves a second chance." The reaction was immediate, fierce, and widespread. Wavebridge's social media department was alerted by noon, and within hours, the director of HR sent out an internal memo requesting a full review of all shortlisted applicants, including Derek Shaw. Clara, caught in the middle of public fury and private accountability, called an emergency meeting with the leadership team. The atmosphere in the boardroom was heavy, charged with the uneasy realization that the situation had grown legs and was now running outside their control. Clara briefed him calmly, but beneath her composed tone was a flicker of concern. Not for the company's reputation, though that mattered, but for the people in the crosshairs. Melora had not spoken much that morning. She sat at her desk, hands folded, eyes distant, waiting not for revenge, but for truth to finish what it had started. In a cramped cafe on the edge of the city, Derek sat hunched over his phone, the video playing silently in front of him with captions he had never expected to see attached to his name. His palms were sweaty, not because of heat but shame. He hadn't known the full clip existed, or that someone had captured the moments between the laughter. He watched himself on screen, leaning out, careless and cruel, and something inside him curled. He didn't try to defend it. He didn't share it or post a response. He didn't even call his PR guy. He just sat there, shoulders slumped, watching the version of himself that the world now saw, the version he couldn't escape. He thought of Melora, how she had stared at him during the interview, not with vengeance, but with restraint. He remembered Zoe's eyes, wide and quiet, a child too young to understand, but old enough to feel humiliated. Derek tapped his screen blank and leaned back in the plastic chair, head against the peeling wall, wondering if regret was supposed to ache this much. He thought about calling Clara, about withdrawing his application before the company could announce their decision, but something told him that would be too easy. It would be a clean exit, and he didn't deserve clean, not yet. He stood up slowly, left a half-finished cup of coffee on the table, and walked out into the street, unsure of where to go, but knowing he couldn't just sit still anymore. His hands slid into his pockets, and his steps, once full of swagger, now moved like someone learning how to walk again. By late afternoon, the decision was made. Clara, after careful deliberation with the hiring board and HR, sent out emails to all candidates, including Derek. His letter was polite, professional, and brief. "Thank you for your interest in Wavebridge Media. After careful review, we have decided not to move forward with your application at this time. We wish you all the best in your future endeavors." Melora didn't ask for the letter. She didn't press the issue. When Clara called her into her office, she simply sat, hands calm in her lap, listening as her mentor spoke gently but firmly. "He won't be joining us," Clara said. "The company has a code. He crossed it." Melora nodded once. "Thank you." Clara leaned forward slightly. "Do you want to talk about it?" Melora hesitated, then shook her head. "There's nothing left to say. I just want to go back to work." And she did. She returned to her desk and opened her laptop, reviewed pending assignments, and resumed her quiet diligence. But inside, something stirred. Not glee, not triumph. Just release. That evening, she bought Puff Puff from a roadside vendor and brought it home to Zoe as a surprise. They sat on the floor, sharing the warm snack from a paper wrapper, laughing softly as crumbs fell. Zoe said, "I told my friend in school that you're a boss lady now." Melora smiled, her eyes crinkling. "Did you?" Zoe nodded. "She said maybe you'll be on TV one day." Melora didn't respond immediately. She just ruffled her daughter's hair and whispered, "Maybe. But even if I'm not, I'll still be your boss lady, right?" Zoe grinned, mouth full, and nodded again. It was the kind of moment too quiet to go viral, but far more lasting. Somewhere across the city, Derek stood outside a gated compound, unsure whether to knock or walk away. He had heard about a youth center run by a friend's older sister, a place where teenagers gathered for after-school mentoring, tutoring, and basic skill training. He'd passed it several times, but never thought of stepping in. Until now. When someone finally opened the gate, a woman in her 40s with thick braids and calm eyes looked him over. "Can I help you?" she asked. Derek hesitated. "I don't have anything formal to offer," he said slowly. "But I used to run a media page. I know branding, digital stuff. I'd like to volunteer, if that's allowed." She studied him for a long time before stepping aside. "We don't pay," she said, "but we do work." Derek stepped in, not as an influencer, not as a brand, just as a man trying to build something new. He met a group of teens seated in a semicircle, all staring at him like he didn't belong. Maybe he didn't yet, but he pulled a stool close and began helping one of them design a flyer for a fictional school event. No cameras. No spotlight. Just a chance to be useful. He would still go home to silence, still scroll through comments that mocked him, still wince when someone tagged his name in that video. But for the first time, he didn't reply or explain. He just kept showing up. One broken day at a time. Not because he wanted to be redeemed by the world, but because he wanted to look in the mirror and not flinch. The months that followed moved like a slow tide, gentle, sometimes restless, but steady. Melora didn't mark the days by calendar dates or holidays anymore. She marked them by Zoe's laughter, by the increasing steadiness in her own voice during presentations, and by the quiet dignity of becoming someone people asked for, not someone they passed over. At Wavebridge, she was promoted to a full-time recruitment executive within 4 months. It wasn't just her competence that earned her the badge, but her restraint, her insight, and her ability to see people for who they were beyond their applications. The Melora who used to sit in silence with her hand on a cracked phone screen while others spoke now stood at podiums during panel discussions, her words measured, her examples drawn not from textbooks but from lived experience. She never once used Derek's story as a case study, never mentioned the interview day again, not even to Clara, who once asked with a gentle smile, "Have you ever regretted not telling the full story?" To that, Melora simply replied, "Truth speaks in layers. Some are better felt than heard." Outside the office, she began helping Zoe with poetry homework, attending school open days, and sewing new curtains for their room on weekends. She still didn't own a car, and she didn't mind. Some things, she believed, were better walked through. One afternoon, while standing in line at a local canteen, someone tapped her shoulder and said, "You look familiar. Were you the woman in that video months ago?" She turned slowly, then smiled softly. "Maybe I was, but I'm not anymore." Derek's days found new rhythm, though not the kind he'd once broadcast to thousands of followers. His mornings began early now, sweeping the community center compound, checking inventory for their donated laptops, and preparing slides for the weekly digital literacy sessions. He spoke less and listened more, especially to the teens who had grown curious about his past but respected his boundaries enough not to pry. Some of them had seen the clip. A few had even commented under it back then. But what softened their opinions wasn't his apology, it was his consistency. He showed up in the rain. He stayed late to help one boy fix a broken presentation. He started bringing in pastries from a nearby bakery on Fridays just to make the room feel lighter. The woman who had first opened the gate to him, Ms. Amara, eventually gave him a small stipend, not for the work, but to cover transportation. He declined it twice, then accepted it on the third offer, quietly thanking her. Derek hadn't returned to Instagram in any meaningful way. His account sat dormant, profile picture removed, bio changed to a single line, learning quietly. He didn't know what the future held, and he no longer needed to. One afternoon, while helping a girl design a flyer for a fictional charity drive, she asked, "Do you miss being famous?" He paused, looked up from the screen, and replied, "I miss being seen, but this feels better." Fame, he realized, was noise. These days, full of small work, quiet effort, and mutual respect, this was music. It was a Friday in mid-September when their paths crossed again, not through intention, but by timing. Wavebridge had been invited to sponsor a youth tech event hosted by the same community center where Derek now worked. Melora was chosen as one of the mentors to attend, alongside two colleagues from the HR department. She arrived dressed in a modest cream blouse and navy slacks, her hair packed into a low bun, her face glowing with simplicity and command. When she walked into the hall, children buzzed around tables displaying projects, digital posters, mock websites, recycled art turned into coded QR games. And then, across the room near the back, she saw him. Derek, in a plain brown shirt, jeans, and sneakers dusted with wear. He was crouched beside a projector, helping a boy recalibrate his slides. He didn't notice her at first, but when he did, it wasn't dramatic. No sharp breath, no frozen stare, just a soft nod. Melora returned it, her lips pressed into a thin but honest smile. Later that afternoon, during a break, they stood beside a water dispenser, cups in hand, neither in a hurry to fill the space with words. Eventually Derek spoke. "She looks happy," he said, referring to Zoe, who was now at the front helping organize name tags. Melora followed his gaze, then looked back at him. "She is." A pause followed. He added, "Thank you for how you handled everything. You could have buried me. You didn't." She looked at him with the calm of someone who had buried many things before, just not people. "I didn't save you either," she replied. "You did that." And they stood like that for a while, two people whose history would never be retold in full, but who had found peace in the parts that mattered most. When the event ended and the banners were folded down, Melora and Zoe walked toward the exit, hand in hand. The compound was lit by soft floodlights that cast long shadows, stretching like memories behind them. As they reached the gate, Zoe tugged at her mother's hand, asked, "Was that the man who laughed at us?" Melora stopped. She turned to her daughter, knelt slowly, and placed both hands gently on her shoulders. "Yes," she said, "that was him." Zoe frowned slightly. "But he looks different now." Melora smiled, not wide, but deep. Because sometimes people change. And when they do, they become the kind of story that doesn't need to be told loudly. Zoe nodded, as though she understood more than her years should allow. They stepped out into the street, the evening calm, the air thick with that scent of fresh harmattan dust and late hope. From a distance, Derek stood at the gate, watching them walk away, not longing, not expecting, just watching. And as the streetlight flickered above him, he turned back inside, disappearing into a hall where chairs needed stacking, and young voices still believed in better tomorrows. In a city full of noise, one man learned to speak less and listen more. One woman remembered how to stand without shaking, and one child, once mocked for walking, learned that dignity isn't always loud. It sometimes walks beside you quietly all the way home. Not every wound bleeds. Some walk silently through shame, rejection, and public mockery, yet still carry grace like a crown unseen. In a world where everyone is rushing to be heard, never forget the power of restraint. Melora could have exposed Derek, dragged him through the mud he threw at her, but she didn't. Why? Because real strength isn't proven by how loudly you clap back. It's shown by how deeply you choose peace when revenge is within reach. Also, never underestimate what it means to be seen, not with pity, but with dignity. Whether you're on the side of Melora, silently surviving and rising in quietness, or on the side of Derek, realizing you were wrong and choosing the long road of accountability, remember this: healing doesn't always start with apologies. Sometimes it begins the moment you decide not to be who you used to be. People will laugh at your struggle, some from tinted glass, some behind anonymous usernames. But if you stay true to your journey and hold your head steady, life has a way of seating you at tables where your worth no longer needs to scream to be acknowledged. Let your silence carry power. Let your growth be the answer. And if you ever fall like Derek, get up differently, not with noise, but with meaning. Dear Lord, we thank you for the quiet strength you plant in those who walk through life unseen yet unbroken. Thank you for the malorous of this world, those who rise through mockery, carry their burdens with dignity, and speak peace into the silence of humiliation. Give them wisdom, give them grace, and give them the kind of strength that doesn't need to be loud to be known. We also lift up the Dereks of this world, those who have made mistakes, spoken carelessly, wounded others without knowing the full depth of their words. Teach them the beauty of true repentance, not the kind that demands applause, but the kind that quietly rebuilds character, one honest choice at a time. Help us all to be more thoughtful with our words, slower with our judgment, and braver in our accountability. May our growth be visible not on screens, but in how we treat those who can't give us anything in return. Let our dignity never come from the approval of the crowd, but from the peace that sits in our soul when we choose to do right, even when no one is watching. And for anyone listening who has been mocked, shamed, or underestimated, I declare over your life, you will rise quietly. You will be seen without begging for attention. And when you speak, the room will listen, not because you shouted, but because your story will carry weight. In Jesus' mighty name we pray, amen. Hope you enjoyed this interesting story. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. See you again in my next story.